Hello, welcome everybody. We are here with our first recording for Empowered Vintage Voices panel. My name is Jody. I'm also known as Goldie Delight in the vintage community. I live on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Stolo and Coast Salish people in what is now known as BC, Canada. I have been involved in the Pinup and Rockabilly community for over 10 years as a pinup model, pinup pageant producer, host, MC, and event organizer. Empowered Vintage Voices is a group focused on educating people within the vintage community by hosting discussions on anti-racism, LGBTQ2AA, feminism, ableism, cultural appropriation, decolonizing vintage culture, and more. Our vision is to help people take action in their communities to ensure vintage communities are safe for all. I'll be moderating this discussion by introducing our panelists, the topic questions, keeping time, and wrapping the discussion. As a white settler with colonizer ancestry, I will be listening and not speaking on this topic. I am so grateful to be here to learn. We believe in paying our teachers for our education, so we'll be putting links to the Empowered Vintage Voices PayPal, Venmo, and Cashapp when this recording is posted on all our social media pages to pay our panelists for their labor. Thank you for being here. So today, our very first topic is decolonizing vintage culture. And I'd love to start to introduce our panelists. So welcome, Alexis. Please take a moment to introduce yourself to our viewers.
Hello, I'm Alexis. I am currently living in Arlington, Texas, which is the native land of the Kickapoo, Humanos, Tawakoni, and Wichita people. My day job, I'm a clothing designer. In my spare time, I'm an activist, which is what I'm doing here and why I founded this group with Jody. And I'm just really excited to get the ball rolling and excited that this is our first panel.
Thank you, that's awesome. I'm really excited too, and a little nervous. I'd also like to welcome Ms. Corazon Rizal. Please take a moment to introduce yourself to our viewers.
This is why we have it. Hi, I'm Miss Corazon Rizal, and I am from Nashville, Tennessee right now, which is on Cherokee, Shawnee, and Yuchi land. And my pronouns are she and her. I identify as a Filipinx American. I do have Chinese roots and unfortunately don't know the rest of my Filipino roots because of colonization, hence why I am here. When I'm not, engaging in pinup and cosplay activities, I work as a communications professional in the social justice sphere and as a community organizer who uses intersectional activist principles. So thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. And I'd like to welcome Dame Scarlett Aznabal. Please take a moment to introduce yourself to our viewers.
Hey, this is Dame Scarlett Aznabal, but you can call me Scarlett. I'm from Southern California, specifically Tongva land. I use she, her pronouns. I do pinup, cosplay, fandom fashion. I've always been a quixotic, quirky queen. I've got into pinup after watching Back to the Future one too many times. I identify as a queer Filipino American, and I love cats. I also live with anxiety, but I just love dressing up. It makes life feel all the more exciting. I've also won cosplay awards. I'm also a master level cosplayer. And when I'm not doing all these things, I work in higher education.
Thank you so much for being here. And we'd like to also welcome Lady Lay. Please take a moment to introduce yourself to our viewers.
Hello, everyone. Happy evening. For those of us in the West Coast, happy later in the night, I guess, for everybody East Coast. My name is Lady Lay, or at least that's what I go by in the vintage community. I've been interested in vintage for the last, I would say, good decade, maybe 2 decades. And when I'm not busy with vintage, I work at a nonprofit that works on focusing on STEAM education. And by doing that, it helps alleviate some of the high tenacity and passion that I feel for humanitarianism as well as activism. And like any activist that got charged up last year, I'm still learning. I'm still very early in my journey. And I do know that this is just a little drop in the water. And to those of you who have been out there with your activism for a long time and you're tired, that is perfectly fine. That's why we're all here together. So we're here to pick up the slack when others need rest, because rest is not stopping. So I hope you all learned something from this talk today. And if there are ever any future questions, I'm sure any of us could be reached on our personal social medias that will be linked later, I'm sure. Oh, and I forgot to mention, I am currently on Tongva and Chumash land, which is now considered Los Angeles.
Thank you so much for that. I'm so excited about this beautiful panel that we have put together, and that you have all come here and volunteered your time today to share with us your awesome knowledge. And so we go to the questions. I'm going to ask a few questions, the same one to each panelist. And yeah, we're going to keep this recording to hopefully about an hour. And here we go. So our first question is, what does decolonizing vintage culture mean, and what does it mean to you? And we'll go to Alexis first.
So decolonizing the vintage culture and lifestyle basically means taking away, maybe not taking away, but recognizing those things that were brought upon the people of the land, you know, that were here first, things that were taken away from them, things that were forced upon them by the colonizers. So, for example, as a Black person myself, you know, my ancestors were brought from their lands to new lands. And within that, you know, over the generations, we've lost traditions. We've kind of lost a sense of where we even come from. You know, people might say sometimes to go back to where we come from, but we don't really know where that is, to be fair. And really addressing the root issues of the colonization in general is a great place to start. It would make the spaces that we move in so much more safe and comfortable for everyone. You know, brown, Black, Indigenous people. For me personally, I don't like being visually attacked by racist memorabilia within our community. For example, the Confederate flag, mammy figurines, which are circulating everywhere. I can't stand them. Blackface performers, believe it or not, they're still around. Minstrel shows weren't cute in the mid-century, and they're still not cute today. So there's a lot of things that we could do to decolonize. I think recognizing those things first and foremost is a great place to start, and then we can move forward from there.
Thank you. Let's go to Miss Corazon next.
So I would like to share a quote that I think about when I think about colonization, and it's by Luis H. Francia, who has written The History of the Philippines. And he calls colonialism the denial of space, whether it be a geographic, political, or psychological, from the collective imagination of people. I would go further and say that it's not even a denial of space, it's an erasure. And I think that when we are decolonizing the vintage aesthetic community, we are giving space and we are allowing other stories to be part of the narrative. It's just not the Western narrative. And it's not just the people who hold power in our society. And for me, it means a lot to be able to do this sort of work with my fellow comrades here in this Zoom. And also, it means a lot to me because being Filipino, I've been colonized so many different ways. My heritage, we were colonized by the Spanish for about 300 years. We were colonized by the Americans. for half a century or so. And then we've been colonized by China, and China is actively still stealing land too. And so I don't have my indigenous Filipino history because of all of that. Our Filipino names are Spanish and some of them are American because of all of that. And I see this happening to other cultures, whether it be Pacifica, the Caribbean, African cultures. I mean, it's countless. And I just don't want what happened to my culture happen to others. And I want to make sure that we get the full story from each person. And I want to also make sure that my representation is there. And I want to take up space myself too as a Filipino American or Filipinx American. So that's what it means to me.
Thank you. Let's go to Dame Scarlett.
What it means to me, it means acknowledging our problematic past and history. There's been a lot of whitewashing and a lot of romanticization of a lot of events in history. And I'm like, what's going on here? Why are we romanticizing something so problematic? Or why are we only focusing on the achievements of colonizers, settlers, and white folks when I go to some of these historical events, these vintage events, and we are ignoring the past contributions of people of color, indigenous folks, etc. And it's just something that just really needs to be addressed and really needs to be spoken about, because the reason why I'm here on this panel today is I can't stay silent about it. And I really think it's very important for folks like us, folks like me, to just really reclaim my past. I believe that Ms. Corazon in the panel summed up the Filipino experience quite well. My real name, my birth name is in Spanish. I have no idea, no clue what my ancestors were like, because a lot of that has just been erased by Spanish colonization. So it's really acknowledging just what has done to people of color's culture, and just trying to figure out, like, how do we navigate through it, and where do we begin decolonizing, because it's just so prevalent in vintage culture, especially where it's romanticized and cultures are completely erased, not acknowledged, or given where credit is due.
Thank you. And next we will go to Lady Lay.
I don't want to reiterate anything that my colleagues on this panel have already said, and I can only speak of my own experience. Decolonizing the vintage community is not just an inherently American thing. It's a global opportunity for all of us to acknowledge that inherent bias is something that we were all given in some way, shape, or form. The indigenous rights that have been taken away aren't just taken away from people in North America. I know that in Vietnam, where I am originally from, that's also something that is extremely problematic in that country. And that's not something that might be in the sphere of a lot of people's consciousness. And that's fine. We can't absolutely know everything about the world. But we need to understand that it is a global epidemic, not just the virus that we're going through, but also this inherent bias that we were all born with. And the first step to decolonizing is acknowledging it, regardless of what your status is in life. You have been a part of this inherent bias in some way, shape, or form. And some of us are a little bit more guilty than others, and depending on where we live, that also gets into play. And different cultures experience a lot of different things, and it's absolutely the time for us to share these stories and hold space for these individuals and understand that this is not just a white person problem. This is a problem that everyone has to take responsibility for and then take action, because that's a part of activism, is that act is a part of activism. So without action, it's performative. And for anybody that doesn't know what that means, it means that when you are putting on a good show for everyone else, you just want to seem like the right kind of person to be around. However, you don't put any actual stock behind that. And I don't mean you actually have to physically go out there and protest. Money donation is fine. Educating others, doing exactly what this panel is doing right here, taking some of our time and sharing not only our experiences, but also alerting to a lot of problems that are not just our own, but they're prolific throughout the vintage community. There really is no necessary need to rehash 500 years of patriarchy and colonization when it's been so damaging. Just because you didn't do it yourself doesn't mean that you don't have that inherent bias. And I'm not safe from it either. I have inherent bias myself. It's a little off subject, but I was listening to a true crime podcast and a survivor on there was traumatized by the color red and green together. And so she says Christmas is very hard for her. And the first thought that came into my head was, well, it's just red and green, they're colors. What's the issue? And that right off the bat is my inherent bias right there. And I had to check myself and I had to be like, that's really rude of you to be like, it's just colors. For this person, it's something extremely traumatizing and a horrible point in her life. And for anybody who has felt a little waffly about understanding where anybody who is BIPOC is coming from when we're talking about this, that's a pretty good metaphor. And if you can't understand that, I don't really know how else to equate inherent bias here. I would say go do some Googling, maybe find someone who can help you out.
Thank you so much for all of that. That was awesome. So we're going to go to the next question, which is a little bit similar to the first question. Why is decolonizing vintage culture so important? We did touch on it a little bit, but let's expand. Let's go there. And should we just keep to the same order? We'll go with Alexis.
So decolonizing vintage culture and lifestyle is important, mostly because we want everybody within our space to feel accepted, safe, comfortable in their own skin. We don't want people to have to change the person that they are just to be part of this culture, right? So I think that whatever we can do in order to make those spaces better for everyone, and I mean literally everyone, it's just something that we need to do as human beings. I feel like it's also important for colonizers and those with colonizer ancestors to understand the ways in which those cultures have exploited others in the past and destroyed many in the past. And a lot of those cultures that have been exploited and destroyed or destroyed have actually added value throughout the generations. And a lot of that value, I think Scarlett touched on this point earlier, a lot of that value is never recognized. So it's interesting when we're in our lifestyle and we see so many beautiful, Hollywood starlets and these wonderful ads for, all these bathing suits for white women and, et cetera, et cetera. But where are the ads for the same items for Black people? They were around then. They wore clothing then. They did their hair. They went out to parties then, so it's like, where's our representation? We'd like to see ourselves reflected in the community that we're in. Makes you feel more safe, makes you feel more comfortable. Also, I think it's important because furthering your education is important. Becoming a better citizen in the world is important, generally anyway. And why would you not want to do that within the vintage lifestyle as well? And then once you become more educated, you can start to correct some of the mistakes you made in the past or the ones you're currently making. You learn about the mistakes and we all make them. I'm guilty myself and I have to check myself all the time. But I'd like to see I'd like to see different cultures represented within our community because we have all contributed so much to the vintage lifestyle and aesthetic. And I would just love to see that. And I think it's also, my last point is that it's also important because it's important to gain a better understanding of how colonization was so detrimental to like the socioeconomic, like the current situation socioeconomically for like Black people, people of color, just everything that was put in place when this particular country was founded has now started, well, not started, it's been snowballing for generations, but it's come to a tipping point, I think, as we can all notice. And every couple generations it comes to a bigger tipping point. So I think it's something, instead of repeating our past mistakes, we need to just learn from them and move forward more smartly and in a more caring way.
Thank you. Ms. Corazon.
I want to echo what Alexis said about safety, but I also want to say that we want people to feel comfortable as well. I have worked in pinup spaces and have come across pinups of color who have left the space because the emotional energy and the emotional labor that they have had to take to be in these spaces pretty much made them burn out. In fact, when I see people of color who are burlesque performers or who are vintage style models, they don't even want to use the word pinup because they don't think that is a word that describes them. And that is a problem to me because I feel like the pinup culture creates this narrative that, oh, any size could fit, any person can fit, but but we don't see that in the total narrative, which brings me to my main point, which is we need to look at the spaces we are in, whether it's historical costuming, pinup, vintage aesthetic or collecting. And we have to ask the question, who do we see? And the most important question after that is, who do we not see? And we really need to keep asking us that, who do we not see? Because people's representation just doesn't disappear by mistake. People who are not participating in specific spaces are not by mistake. There are reasons for it. And at least from my own experience with the pinup scene, it's because people of color are exhausted and they have so many, I mean, that's the thing, like, this is supposed to be a hobby. I mean, this is a hobby for most of us in this panel. And if that can't be something fun for them, equally fun as it is for a white person, then that's awful. Especially when our BIPOC community are dealing with a lot more issues than, the triggers of colonization, whether it be cultural appropriation or just denying of space. Many of us are dealing with other things outside of that, and that just as icing on the cake. And so I could see why people don't want to be in that space. And that's just makes me really sad. And my last point is, vintage aesthetic, styling, collecting, historical costuming. It's the underlying passion that I see between all of these is that we love to preserve history. I think when I talk to all of these people who are in these different scenes, they are in it for the history. They love learning about the past, but history tends to be told by the colonizer's perspective, and that is very unfair. We need to hear everyone's stories so we get the full picture, because there's a total bias, when you're the colonized, you're seen as inhuman. You're seen as not good enough. You're seen lesser than. And then your story gets erased, or it just disappears. And that we need to break the cycle. And I want to echo what others have said about, we are all not perfect. I used to be, and I still occasionally do, Moana from the Disney sphere. And there were cases where I was at a party and there was a lot of Polynesian pop tiki elements. And I, came to this mindset that I thought that was okay because people didn't realize that people will come to the realization that it's like Chinese food. Like you go to Panda Express, but people know it's not really Chinese food. So they'll realize that, you know, this Pacifica, you know, faux tiki element is not real tiki. But you have to realize there is no true representation of this community. And so we just have to be careful, and we have to keep learning, and we have to be gentle with ourselves, but we still have to continue to be, you know, eternal students when it comes to this. So I think that's all I have to say.
Thank you. We will go to Dame Scarlett.
It's important because the damage has already done. And we have to ask ourselves, how do we move forward from a problematic past? When we decolonize, we acknowledge the forgotten histories of people's cultures that have been erased, that have been colonized. And just to reiterate from the panel, like, it makes people feel much more included. And I really feel like there's a lot of collecting of vintage kitsch, tchotchkes, antiquities, and accessories. And we have to kind of ask ourselves, like, yeah, where does that come from? What does it mean? This is not necessarily a vintage example, but when my partner went to Hawaii several years ago, he was thinking, okay, I'm not going to touch anything. I don't want to anger like any spirits of the island. I don't want, in case if I step on something, or if I may have touched something, if not, but, you know, let me just whatever blessing I can just give like the native lands, just as a white person just coming in here, what can I do to like learn more, and also acknowledge, hey, if I did anything offensive on this land, my kindest apologies. And just acknowledging that some of these kitsch tchotchkes and accessories, they're not just like little trivial pieces that you can just have like as decoration. Like it's not, like, sometimes there's like a deeper meaning behind it. And I think it's really important to acknowledge where it comes from. Did a native person make those earrings that you own, or did for example, my culture, I remember seeing like Filipino decorations at this one restaurant at a Disney World. Like, hey, does the person who has designed this know these are Filipino decorations? And if so, do you know the history of them? Because like, one, it's cool that you can have it, but I also wanted to know, like, hey, y'all know know the history behind this, right? And I think it's really important to just educate ourselves on a deeper level. Like, yeah, this might be okay to have, and to also, like, if we want to have like these accessories, these cultural inspired accessories of decoration, where does it come from, and are we really supporting and giving credit to the culture where it's from? Like, we're not saying like it's not okay to own these, but we have to know where it's from, and we have to also just acknowledge like the people who make them. If I'm in Arizona, if I'm in Sedona, I'd rather buy a souvenir from like a gift store that sells like local native craft, because it goes back to that community, rather than just going to some random souvenir store that says I heart Sedona. I'd rather give it to like the native land. Just as a tourist coming in, because I'm a tourist, I'm not part of this, but at the same time, let me support you because you invited me to spend time enjoying the beautiful site of Sedona, for example.
Thank you. And back to Lady Lay.
What all of the other panelists have touched on that I have a word for is, it's called the white ruler. And that is what society has placed on everyone since colonization has begun. So we can take that back to a king of Portugal somewhere in the medieval times. So what that white ruler is that it's a constant marker that BIPOC are measuring themselves against. And it's the white standard. That means that it is somebody who has pale skin, light colored eyes, light colored hair, very slender, as they say in that one rap song, 36, 24, 36, which leaves room for actually no one. And so this white ruler that perpetuates not only our society, it perpetuates all aspects of our lives. And that's what we're all hitting on right now, is that it was not just a thing in the past that was obvious in all the advertisements, but it was also something that is happening today, right now, in all different spheres. There are plenty of pinup companies that I know of that don't have very much diversity, whether that be size, gender, what people present as, or race. And that just puts a bad taste in my mouth. Of course it does. I'm an Asian queer woman who wants to support my communities. And so that doesn't include somebody who is perpetuating colonialist ideas, which is perpetuated everywhere. And that's okay if you didn't know that your viewpoint was traumatizing or really ill-intended to somebody else. It's the fact that you learn that and you listen to the person who is saying that they're hurting. There's too many times where I can only speak for myself, where I have spoken out about Asian matters, such as that horrible racist scare zone that Universal Studios had a couple years ago. I contacted 18 Million Rising about it because not only were they putting actors in yellowface, but they also mishmashed Japan, China, Vietnam, and religious symbols inside. They had Buddha statues littered throughout the area with the very specific sacred symbol that was stole by the Nazis that has been used as a swastika. If you know anything about Buddhism, you know there's a difference between the two. But there were those sort of idols just littered around the scare zone. And then the cargo had East India Trading Company printed on the side. And that's not just traumatizing to Asians, that's traumatizing to anybody who is Black, who is considered an other. The East India Trading Company was not a great company. They were a Dutch company that profited off of not only human trafficking of all kinds, but it also stole a lot of different objects from other places and gave it to a lot of colonizers to put in their house and say, oh, it's so exotic. So this whole idea of decolonizing and how we do it, it's starting from the get-go. It's realizing where you are, look around you, look at your words. I had to correct my roommate today. I don't mean to blow anybody's ears, but he said, oh, I feel like you me out of, you got like out of this like situation. And I said, well, that's actually very incorrect for you to say because that is a term that's no longer used. We actually use Romani, and the word gypsy is no longer in our vernacular. So that little saying you just said is incorrect. Please take it out. And, you know, he was like, oh my gosh, you're so right. I had no idea. I move on, and that's what you do. So, and I just wanted to say something while some of my colleagues mentioned the word tiki, which I hope you sponge out of your vernacular and use tropical instead. And this is just coming from my Pacific Islander sister. She is somebody who has a lot of trauma tied to that word, and it has no value in the English language. Use tropical instead. It doesn't hurt anyone. If you use the word tiki, it hurts everyone.
Thank you so much. All right, so we are on to our, that was so informative. So thank you all so much for that. So we're on to our next question. What are some examples of colonization in vintage culture, and how will we decolonize those examples? So I'm going to say that again because that wasn't very clear. What are some examples of colonization in vintage culture, and how will we decolonize these examples?
So I think we've touched on this a little bit already. Colonization within the vintage culture looks like no representation or very little representation of the, the people of color who have contributed to the culture over the years. For example, if you go to Viva Las Vegas for the music, it should be known where that music comes from. And let's be real, that music comes from Black people. You're welcome. And most people don't know the history of music in general. But if you like a tune on the radio, it comes from Black people. And that's just the end of it. I hope we can get actually a conversation just on where music comes from in the future, because that will be, I think, super informative. But beyond that, the eroticizing of women of color's bodies, like we touched on previously, those little knickknacks that you like to buy of the mammies or of the Black woman who's super busty with the big ass and then big red lips. That's gross. Okay. Those are caricatures. You shouldn't own one. And there's no need to want to own one. And if you do find yourself owning one, maybe now's the time to say, oh, I didn't know that. Let me find a good museum for this to be in, so somebody else can now learn that maybe this isn't appropriate. Another example would be, like somebody said before me, reducing people to animal-like creatures versus human beings. We don't like that. Racist memorabilia like the Confederate flag, which I touched on before. We had a huge push a couple of years ago to get it banned from Viva Las Vegas. We suffered a lot of blowback, but it was eventually done. And it makes a lot of people feel a lot safer, just less, I don't know, less attacked, because honestly, that flag gives me the heebie-jeebies. And it's unfortunate that I live in Texas because I have to see it every day. But it shouldn't be in our fun, event spaces and within this lifestyle, because it's gross. Wearing traditional garb when you're not part of that tradition is a huge thing in the vintage community, which I'm sure the other panelists will get to later, because a lot of that is from Asian culture, let's be real. And that the thought process of the colonizer mentality is sort of like having the right lifestyle or the right way to live, and everybody else is somehow wrong. There is no right or wrong. It's just different. It's instead of classifying this as right and then everybody else is other, let's just have it all be right. You know what I mean? Let's find a way to bring it all together in a very appreciative, knowledgeable way, and like my colleague said before, finding a way to show your appreciation and to give credit where credit's due. If you didn't come up with the thing, credit the thing. It's really not that hard. It's just like when you credit a photographer or a makeup artist on your Instagram photos, it's literally that simple. Or just educating yourself about where a piece comes from and then spreading that knowledge, because then not only are you doing yourself a favor and making the space safer, but you're also helping to further that education of other people who might not know. And I think it's really easy to move the physical issues anyway. The mental issues, the mentalities are a little harder to get past, but at least the physical stuff is like the first step, because they're so easy to remove. Banning the Confederate flag, easy, done, we're over it. You know what I mean? The memorabilia, find a new home for it. You don't need it. But just becoming aware of your surroundings, what's going on around you, the things you're collecting, why you're collecting them, and maybe touching base. Like, let's say you do have, a mammy doll, or let's say you do have one of those, any knickknack from like an Asian culture. Maybe somebody from that culture that could benefit from owning that piece instead of you. Maybe rehoming it would be, the best option. And those are just a couple of examples that I had.
Thank you. I think we'll keep to the same order. So we'll just keep going here.
So I'm gonna touch on two examples. I'm gonna start with Chinese New Year. As I mentioned before, I have Chinese heritage, despite I'm ethnically Filipino, but I have Chinese bloodline. So we do celebrate in our family. And so many, and the fact that you're calling it Chinese New Year too is kind of decolonizing it, because more cultures than just China celebrates Lunar New Year, as we would prefer to call it. But I want to give you an example of this colonization. I used to work at performance studios in Nashville, Tennessee, where we would dress people for plays and anyone just wanting a costume for a party. And I worked in the rentals department with like theater departments and also just, you know, people who wanted to rent. And there was a couple who came in. It happened to be Lunar New Year that day. I was wearing my cheongsam that I sewed myself. It was bright green, which is really important for you to know, because when they came in, they said, "Where are your red Chinese costumes?" And I said, "Well, you know, I'm actually of Chinese descent and actually wearing, you know, a cheongsam. And I want to let you know that you really, you know, you don't have to wear red. And we don't have red ones in stock, but we have a, you know, plethora of colors." And it kind of killed me, to be quite honest, to be doing that, because I knew in my heart that they did not have the cultural appreciation for the clothing. But you work in customer service and sometimes you have to do things that kill your soul so you could get your paycheck. Luckily, I had a very understanding manager and boss and could see how traumatized I was by the conversation, and she stepped in. But no matter how much she said, you know, there's a, you know, somebody of Chinese descent telling you this is how Chinese people, you know, could dress, you know, just take one of ours. They just kept saying, no, no, no. If you go on any Chinese New Year, they would kept saying Chinese New Year website, it is red. It is red. So that is what we have to wear. The envelopes, they're red. Like, and it was very, very traumatic for me, because I was being gaslighted before my very eyes about my background. And I want to bring up a point about Lunar New Year. While, you know, hundreds of Asian Americans in this country and elsewhere too, in other Western societies, have been victims of violence and racist attacks, and I did not see one company profiting on Lunar New Year acknowledge that before the Atlanta shootings. And I think that made me even more angry, because you're profiting off my culture and you are not giving back to it. And you are not recognizing you want to make money off of us, but you don't care about us, is what you're saying, basically. And it really hurt. I mean, it really hurt. And so, very impassioned example of Lunar New Year. I have it in my notes as Chinese because of the story, but yeah, Lunar New Year and my own experiences with it. And then I think the second example that I like to go in depth in is what Lady Lay was saying, tiki, or as we and many of our Pacific Islander friends would say, tropical. I've done a lot of research on this, and I understand that people who really, you know, identify with tiki and Polynesian pop, they really love the escapism about it. They love the getaway, but that's escapism for colonizers and escapism for those who are colonized. And it's not escapism for all. And I'm a total geek, because I mentioned that I was a cosplayer, right? I play Dungeons and Dragons, and I know that you can create escapism in a fantasy land without exploiting other cultures. You can, trust me. I'm a level 13 druid, and and I, you know, there's ways to do it responsibly, you know? And so I just want people to think about this. And you probably, I know, and I've had people come back at me and say, well, why haven't I heard Pacific Islanders, or I prefer to call them Pacifica or Oceania, people say, because I've had Pacific Islander or Pacifica friends say that they prefer to be called Pacifica, because Pacific Islander was kind of a term that was given to them from America. Just a little background there. I've had Pacifica friends say, well, you know, tiki is the least of my problems. I'm dealing with climate change. I'm dealing with my land being actively colonized. I'm dealing with, if you may not know this, but Pacifica peoples in America actually have one of the lowest access to education rates. So I'm dealing with extreme poverty. This is the least of my worries. And when I do go and say, you know, hey, this is a problem for me, people really get angry, especially because I have this stereotype placed on me saying, hey, I'm you're supposed to be relaxed. That's how, you know, people from Oceania are supposed to be like. They're supposed to be relaxed, they're supposed to be chilled. Why are you so angry, you know, about tiki? And it's just like, I've come across and I've interviewed a lot of Pacifica peoples in the past few months about this specific issue, and they've just said it's not at the top of my problem list that I deal with every day. And so I made a link tree if you're interested in learning more about decolonizing tiki. It's tiny.cc/tropical.tiki. And I encourage you to go there. I want to mention that tiki does colonize from Caribbean, Asian, and Pacifica cultures, but I'm not hearing the Pacifica voices as much. And I think that there's a reason for that in the vintage community. And I just want to say, like, it has hurt me too. I have gone to tiki bars, I have gone to friends' houses, and I have seen, this is the nipa hut, or bahay kubo in the Filipino culture. I have seen photos of this, and people call them tiki huts or tiki shacks. No, this is where my culture lives in, and it's called a bahay kubo. I have seen it on shoes that are sold as tiki shoes, and those are not tiki shoes. They are called bakyas. They're souvenir shoes that you're supposed to bring home, that back in the mid-century, visitors would bring back to their, as a souvenir. So I just want you to, like, remember where those references are, and I'm sure everyone's going to echo that. Know where the references are and respect them. Thanks. Sorry, very heated right now.
Oh, I appreciate that. I cannot wait to do a whole topic on tiki. And yeah, so we will carry on here.
Yeah, I have like two major examples. An extension from the world of tiki, the Adventureland Days scene in the Disney theme parks community. Now, I love the Jungle Cruise. I like going on the Jungle Cruise. I love the puns. I love the jokes. And I was under the assumption at Adventureland Days, like, yeah, let's wear explorer outfits, our pith helmets, our jodhpur pants, and like, let's explore animals. That'd be so cool. My partner and I were just so hyped for it because he loves Jungle Cruise. I love the Jungle Cruise too. So like, yeah, let's explore animals and let's pretend like we're like, we're going on this like 1910s adventure. And then, oh boy, the first year wasn't so bad because it kind of had like that childlike wonder, like let's learn about animals kind of thing. And then word got to, I guess, the Tiki Oasis community, because I know that there was like a lot of overlap between Adventureland Day and Tiki Oasis, because we had a lot of people come up to us like, oh yeah, going to Tiki Oasis, like, I don't know. But anywho, so there was a lot of people that were coming in with like much more hardcore like vintage outfits, like they were almost like just right out of the like 1910s. Let me educate y'all for a bit. During the 1910s, early 1900s, early 20th century, America loved to put its fingers in a lot of indigenous islands and countries around the Pacific and around Asia. I was very happy that the fact that my history teacher actually taught us this, and we had to memorize all the countries today that were colonized. So I am actually privileged to have this amount of education that was taught to me. And I know a lot of deep dive culture about how the Philippines was under American colonization. And there are photographs, there are political cartoons of then President McKinley giving like a Filipino baby like a bath. It's like, yeah, This is symbolic of we gotta wash those dirty Filipinos, and this is the United States. We're gonna take care of that. And of course, without going into too much gory detail, it comes with all the lovely things that come with colonialism. Yes, this is making my blood boil as I think about it. And if you want to have a really great 5-minute visual representation of what this feels and what this looks like, watch the music video for Rammstein's Ausländer. That video might be in German, but it drives home the point of colonization of indigenous lands and indigenous folks very, very well. In the video, Rammstein, they wear like the 1910s adventurer style outfits, and they do the colonist thing, and they even bring religion to it. It's a very good visual depiction of what happens when you have white colonizers going into indigenous land. And my partner and I, at the time, we weren't really thinking too hard about it, but we were just noticing the demographics of the people that were coming in wearing like these beautiful, I'm not, don't get me wrong, they were just beautiful outfits, and I just like just how they were put together. We've noticed that they were like just older white couples, white men, and neither of them would just come up to us and just talk to us because we're an interracial couple. And my partner, he's also visually impaired too. And when we were asking one of the folks out there, because he had a hard time reading because a part of the event is like a scavenger hunt around Disneyland, and he just gave him a dirty look. It's like, oh, you can't read? I'm like, no, he's legit visually impaired. So we had to deal with some ableism through that. And that really just really turned us off. And like, why are people romanticizing and thinking like this whole like age of adventure, age of colonization is just like your cosplay or just like your day to just pretend you're a colonizer? We got into this because like, yeah, cool, animals, like cool, we can make jungle pens and pretend we're jungle cruise skippers. Like we wanted to do for fun, but we no longer do that there. But we also noticed that there was a cross section of the tiki crowd coming in over, and they would also bring their tiki inspired outfits. And the other cringeworthy thing about quote unquote tiki kitsch, tiki pop, Polynesian pop is they're like, okay, we're gonna also integrate like these random native kind of items. So like, wow, let's wear a flower crown. Hoo-hoo, it'd be funny if we had like some arrows just kind of like into like as if we were shot by natives. Like, oh my goodness. It's like, wow, like y'all are, yeah, y'all are lovely people. I don't want to associate with you. So things like that just drive people who just want to just like, hey, fun animals. And just like, yeah, we don't want to be a part of it. And the other thing too, I know I talk about this a lot on my website, and I talk a lot about this in a lot of vintage spaces. And if I'm going to be the only loud person about it, so be it. Whitewashing and World War II historical reenactment spaces. I've been to several of these, and my historical outfit for this is the Waves uniform. Now, did you know that Asian Americans also served with the Waves during World War II and in the Korean War? They actually had Japanese women serve with the Waves because they needed translators. So when I step onto your reenactment cosplay camp, do not treat me like the enemy, because guess what? Filipinos were allies in World War II. If you love history so much, you would have known that the Filipinos also helped save your asses in World War II. I have family who fought in the guerrilla groups in the Philippines, in the Philippines. And like, yeah, we helped you guys. So when you have like these events in 2021, where you say it's to educate, but you eradicate the people of color that have helped you like fight against evil, fight against imperialism, and you whitewash and romanticize the ish out of it. Yeah, maybe I'm not too motivated to go, but you know what? I'm just gonna take up space anyway, because this is my culture and this is also part of my history. And I'm not just Filipino, but I'm Filipino American. And this is a space I'm also gonna occupy too, and love it or leave it.
Thank you. And back to Lady Lay.
I think the first instant instance, excuse me, I'm going to bring up was something that happened semi-recently on a post that I made about just changing our vernacular to tropical, and a cisgendered heterosexual white man felt it was necessary to comment that I should go out of my way to contact every establishment that has the word tiki in it and go out of my way to make sure that they change it to tropical. And that's exactly why BIPOC or anybody who feels othered in this community leaves, is because of individuals like that. You are so wrapped up in the preciousness of a word that you are willing to protect abusers, murderers, and, you know, lots of other nasty things that I won't put on tape because we don't need that. So that just goes back to listen to the people who are hurting, who tell you that they are hurting. When you say to someone that you don't agree with them on that point, it's essentially like if somebody came up to you and said, hey, you just stabbed me, I don't really like that. And you go, oh, really? And you keep stabbing them anyways. It's madness. It's actual madness. And if you think of your words in that manner, you are stabbing somebody, another human that's on this planet, regardless of what you may or may not know about them. And they absolutely have feelings and hopes and dreams. And so this sort of void that the internet has given us the illusion that we have, isn't real. It's a lie. This void, it doesn't protect you from the real world, and it doesn't make anything that happens in the real world less than, because it doesn't happen at the ferocity that it does on the internet, or vice versa. And I think that goes into the whole conversation about ownership and responsibility. Our culture has really reinforced the idea of not taking responsibility of one's actions, and also on the flip side of that is holding people to a perfection standard that is incapable of any human of reaching. If somebody messes up and they take responsibility for it and issue an actual apology, we hold them to it and move on. There's no reason to continue to berate that individual. If that is not the case, then of course berate that individual. For instance, the vintage Egyptologist, I think that's what her name is. She's incredibly problematic and has been for at least a decade. I'm not the only person who has uncomfortable feelings about her. It is not that I have an issue with the word Egyptology. That is the study of ancient Egypt. If that's what grinds your gears and makes you go, then go for it. What I don't like is her and her partner's idolization and romanticism of this pith colonial time that Scarlett was just mentioning, where you're not very aware of how much mass murder was happening, not only to the individuals there, but also the ecosystem, because people still hunt animals to this day. And that wrecks the natural ecosystem of anyone who is indigenous to the land, no matter where you are. So those are just two very small instances that are still issues to today, because it was only a month ago that a big group of us reached out to American Duchess to tell them that the vintage Egyptologist was not the person to partner with. And that's just the top of it. There were plenty of individuals who were supporting alt-right ideas and 45 and other things like that. So we need to be aware of where our money is going. We can't be ignorant anymore. If you want to live a life that is blissfully ignorant, then I can't hold space for you, because every time I walk out of the door, I might die. And the same thing for Alexis too. It used to not be that for me because I'm considered a model minority, but it is now the reality for anybody who is Asian presenting because of hateful words that have been societally seen as acceptable, and then no accountability for any action that has been taken by that. And I agree with Ms. Corazon, what she said earlier. The Asian community is the one that is fetishized the most by the vintage community. And there has not been a lick of support for any Asian, not at the beginning of this pandemic, not after Atlanta, not after this week, not after a 7-year-old got stabbed in Sam's Club. So why would we want to stay? Why would we want to speak out? Why would we want to put ourselves on the line again on the internet, in addition to what we deal with in our personal and regular lives? Why would we want to hold out our arms and ready for you to cut us up if you don't want to listen? And then I'm here bleeding for no good reason, and I'm upset because you've hurt me and I've tried to help you, but you continue to cut me, and then you gaslight me for saying that, oh, well, you're bleeding. And when I tell you that you're the one who has done that, I get gaslit again by saying, well, I'm just an angry, whatever, you could throw it on, angry feminist, angry Asian woman, angry woman. I had to fight another woman this week on a comment about saying all men are trash. I am ready for that fight. If you do not understand that there are certain phrases that are just now in the common vernacular because the patriarchal colonization society that has existed for the last 500 years in America and last 5,000 in the world, we're just done. And the way that you say, well, that's just the way things are. Well, that's just the way things are now. We won't go back. We can't stay silent. And I won't damage myself to make you feel better. I don't believe anybody should ever feel the need to lay themselves down for somebody else, because that fight is not for you to fight. That's something for the universe to fight, because obviously this person is, or situation or whatever it may be, is bigger than you right now. And you need to save all that love that you have for something else, for another time, for somebody who will listen, because there are those people. I was able to change some really hateful young Vietnamese men's minds about the Black community when we originally came out and we say, you know, yellow peril stands with Black power, because that's the way it's always been. And yeah, there has been a lot of tensions between the Black and Asian community. There is a lot of atrocities that we have done to one another, but that doesn't mean that we can't come together now and do something better. Just to lean back on this idea that we are doomed to do exactly what we've always done is not only an insult to just human nature, but the gift that the fact that there's even life on this planet. If you don't know that, go research some Neil deGrasse Tyson and learn the fact that DNA even started is a fluke. The fact that life even started on this planet is a fluke. And then once you're inspired by that, watch the documentary called Exterminate All the Brutes, because it's an honest representation of what colonialism was like, especially for the Black community. And he does touch on others as well. And that phrase is from pamphlets and books that were passed out, because that's the othering that has been innately there for centuries. It's exterminate all the brutes so that we can take over, so that we have all the power. And I think we all need to understand that we're all brutes. We're all the brutes, and exterminating all of us is madness, because that means that's the end. And it's we can't be so disappointed in the way that things are, and we can't just let that bog ourselves down. We have to keep moving forward and not be silent, because our silence is part of the problem. That's enabling behavior. So I'm so glad to be on this panel of very strong-willed women. I've seen some of their activism before this. So I know that what they speak is their truth, and hopefully other people will start believing in that truth as well. And we do this one Zoom call at a time, one post at a time, one conversation at a time. that's how we do these things. I wish I could go back to LACMA Dapper Day and really school the people who wanted to take pictures of me because I looked overly Asian. That's not a reason to take a photo of me. That's not a reason to compliment me. It's not a reason to get super interested all of a sudden. It's just not, and it's not just guys, it's women as well. So we just need to all realize that we are all guilty on some frame, platform, way of something, and understand that there's room for growth, there's room to learn more. Like I just learned today, thanks to Miss Corazon, that I should be using Pacifica instead of Pacific Islander, because I have yet to meet somebody who was a Pacific Islander who told me that. But that doesn't mean that I don't change my vernacular. So that's a great example for anybody who's watching this now or post later. I don't know anybody who personally said that to me, but because Miss Corazon said that she knows somebody who does, I'm changing my vernacular. So it's that easy, folks. It's really that easy. And that's all we're asking for is if I wouldn't call you a saltine, don't come back at me. Like if I have enough respect for you to call you whoever you are by your name, by I don't know anything but what is surface on you, that's what we're asking for in return. That's it, really bottom line.
Thank you so much. So I think that we have probably touched on this, but we are going to continue through with these questions. The next question is decolonizing vintage culture the root of the problem? And we'll just go in the same order as we were going in before.
I think this is a pretty quick question to answer. I think that decolonizing vintage culture is a start of the root of the problem. There's a lot of roots down there, right? It's like a tree. There's a lot of, some are big roots, some are littler roots, but they're all down in there. And decolonizing is part of that bigger structure. It's not the whole answer, but it would be a massive step in the right direction to get people more on track to being good humans.
I just want to echo what Alexis said, because yeah, it's a root in a tree, a very problematic tree that we need to cut down. And I do want to make a point that cultural appropriation is a symptom of colonization. And I think people really, really focus on cultural appropriation the most. And they're just saying, we just want to cancel things and we just want to get rid of things that are great, that, everyone's enjoying. And they're not thinking, where is it coming from? Colonization. And why is it problematic? And I think if you listen to a few of the Pacifica, I think particularly Samoan and Chamorro voices that are in that link tree that I shared earlier, they will tell you that they don't like to come at it as a cultural appropriation problem, because when you do, most white people who are very attached to these things shut down immediately. And so they go at it through decolonizing. And I like that approach. And I really loved when I saw that this panel was called Decolonizing, because that is where it's a good start, and it's all connected. Another thing that's connected is, I think Lady Lay mentioned this, the dominance of Western narratives. That is another symptom of colonization that we need to get to, and is, by decolonizing vintage culture, we're getting to that root as well. I would love a day where we would see other vintage fashion from other cultures that are not Western. I am starting to learn more and more about Asian vintage culture through Instagram, oddly enough, but I want to learn more about, Caribbean, African, Pacifica, I want to learn more. And I think if we start to decolonize, we'll start to learn more and we'll start to hear more stories. And so definitely not like the root of the problem, but definitely one root in the tree that will make things better for all of us.
It is definitely a part of the problem, but just to kind of echo the panel, it is one giant root that is a part of the bigger tree. And I just really feel that that for us to truly decolonize, I feel that the people who have the most power need to listen to understand, not to anticipate, to debate. So many times I've seen folks like, oh no, that cannot apply to me. Or like, no, but are you telling me that just by eating tacos, I'm a colonizer? Like, no, like, don't put all this non sequitur stuff in here. Sometimes like if you don't understand what's going on, or if you think that your actions and the things you might consume are problematic, just take a sit back, listen, read, and don't try to just jump into debate because you feel like you need to like just pick a random fight online. I've just seen this happen just so many times, especially within the vintage community. So just if we are to like just remove the roots of the problem, we also, this goes for everyone, we need to listen to understand and not anticipate the debate.
I'll make it really short. My tips are just listen, do your research, and have a heart. And by that, I mean, really listen to this person who is expressing their hurt to you, and ask yourselves not why are they feeling this way, or more of what happened to them that got them to get this way. Is it experiences they might have had, and vice versa? It's not just for people on this side of the conversation, it's also for us on the other side, as viewing anybody who has an antithesis to our sort of line of logic. We need to all just have a little bit more grace for one another when we're discussing these things, because they are very sensitive and they are very emotionally charged for a lot of people. So if you are the one who is perpetrating the perpetrator, then I would say listen more and have a little kindness to open your heart to maybe investigate why this person might be feeling the way they do. And in reverse, when you're seeing somebody act out inappropriately in any form, space, or way, have a little grace to be able to understand that this person might not be completely aware of what they're doing. It might be something that they're just used to and they didn't really think about it. Not that that's an excuse, but it is a reason to let somebody gently off the hook. We don't have to go full Molotov cocktail every single time we go into a situation like this. It actually is extremely off-putting to both sides when both sides get emotionally charged. So really the only solve for that, and the way for us to all move forward, as we've all recognized that this is part of a very much larger systemic, globally impacted problem, is that we all need to talk to each other like we recognize that we're all human. Don't just talk into the void at this face that you see because it just looks like a picture. As I said before, that picture has hopes, dreams, wishes, people that they love, people who love them, and so do you. If you don't, go find help, please. Like, there are so many resources out there. Go find help, because you need help. If you are that alone, you need help of some kind, because as primates, we are not meant to be alone. We are meant to do this together. And the way we do that is by not only holding other people to our standards of morality, but also in the way that we converse with one another. And I know I've been faulty of that. I called somebody yesterday a talentless child. They did deserve it, and it was because it had a full fallout of the conversation. But if somebody I see just wears a sombrero, I'm going to say, for instance, I'm not going to just go right off the bat, go like, oh, how dare you, you colonizing racist, like how do, no, I'm going to go, hey, do you mind removing your sombrero? It's actually very offensive to people of Latinx and Hispanic culture. And like, let me actually educate you the difference between the two. And yes, that's not my own history, but as a humanitarian, I need to have a global awareness of all. And that learning mentality that you were talking about, Ms. Corazon, that's really just it at the end of the day. Listen, learn, do better, because we're all tired. Look, I've got other things that I'd rather do. So don't make my work harder than it already is.
Awesome. And then now we are going to, how do we decolonize vintage culture? What are the steps needed to move the vintage community forward in decolonizing vintage culture? So some action, I guess.
So how do we decolonize vintage culture? So I think that it's going to be all about education, right? Which is what Jody and I, again, we're doing, starting this whole series of discussions. It's going to take a lot of education. It's going to take a lot of listening. It's going to take a lot of what I call willful learning. There's a kind of learning that you learn when, somebody's beating you across the head, for hours and hours with a pen, and then you finally get it. We don't want to learn that way. We'd rather learn because we want to, because then you actually learn the material, you digest it, you become one with it, and it's easier moving forward when you want something, right? So we need to educate each other. We need to identify the issues that we have. I know a lot of people like to sweep things under the rug and just pretend, like they have blinders on and everything's wonderful in my world. Well, it may be wonderful in your world, but I guarantee you it's not wonderful in everyone's world. And we all live in the same world. So let's actually take those blinders down and look around a bit and realize, oh, some shit's going on. Some things are happening here. Okay. And then let's self-correct. You know what I mean? You can't control the actions of others, unfortunately, but you can control yourself, right? So it starts from within. It starts from, like I said, educating. It starts from recognizing, and then you need to self-correct. And then once you've started that process, you can help correct others. And like some of my other co-panelists were saying, it needs to come from a place of compassion, which is what this group is founded on. Because if you're just going to go in attack mode right from the jump, I'm going to shut down and I'm not going to listen. And most people, it's a natural human reaction. Somebody's yelling at me, not listening. You know what I mean? So we need to remember that we're all humans. We do all make mistakes. Some mistakes are more easily forgivable than others. But we do need to try our best to come from a place of compassion and a place of learning. And like some of the other people on the panel were saying, some things will not be forgiven just because we are compassionate and just because we are here to teach and educate each other. It doesn't mean that you get a pass to just say whatever old thing you want to say and, oh, forgive me anyway. Oops. Nah, we don't play that way. We can generally tell, I think most people can generally tell when you're being genuine, when you're being honest. We can tell what a genuine, honest mistake looks like. We can tell what a purposeful mistake looks like, or, a purposeful action to hurt somebody looks like. If you've been called out in the past and you don't change your behavior, then you're purposely making that conscious decision to continue the bad behavior. And then I wash my hands of you. You know what I mean? I'm not here to just endlessly argue with people until I turn red in the face. Like Lady Lay said, I have better things to do with my time, but I am honestly here to help educate. People reach out to me all the time and ask me questions, about the cultures I'm part of and what things are correct to say and what things are not correct to say. If I don't have the answer, I usually go ask somebody who I know has the answer, but we should all be finding those answers together, right? And I think those are the steps we need to take in order to decolonize ourselves. Let's educate, let's recognize the problems, and let's self-correct, and then let's move forward.
Jumping on what Alexis said about education, I think that there are things when you are looking for seeking out your education, there are a few things you need to keep in mind. The first thing is, not one person of each community is a monolith. Okay, so we don't want you to come here from this talk and say like, this is gospel and how we should decolonize. We want you to go and get other sources. We want you to go and find other voices. And I think with this idea of like monolithing, I'm going to make it a verb, is why, when I talk to somebody who is, gently, who is cultural appropriating, let's say blackface, and they'll say like, well, I have this other Black friend who says that's fine, so you're wrong. And I think that's really problematic to just base it off of one voice. You need to seek out multiple voices. And you need to also know where that information is coming from, because even when you do try to educate yourself online, especially from academic sources, you have to remember that Western society is the one that holds power and has like a lot of control over the education. So you need to really think about the biases of each, source. Like, Lady Lay said, we all have our biases, and you need to be aware of that and not, take what we say as, gospel or as like the true word. And we're all just human, and we're all just, a small part of the representation of the different backgrounds that we all represent here. And you need to seek out those voices. And I think one of the best starts of doing that is, diversifying your feed. I loved that hashtag that came out of last year's uprisings. I think that, look at your feed. What is on there? Are you seeing mostly white voices? Maybe, you diversify, queer voices, add queer voices, add BIPOC voices. Just, and read the captions. I am seeing some really beautiful activism. And I sometimes wonder if people don't read the captions, but they just like the pretty photo, but there's a really good message behind it. And so read the captions, read the stories of these people. And lastly, so I'm giving you some tangible things. So I'm going to go back to more abstract things, but still things that you could apply. Learn what cultural appreciation is, okay? So cultural appreciation is going to the person of that culture, paying them for their time. That's really key, because you don't want them doing free labor, and learning. You are the student, they are the teacher. I think that's the best way you could educate yourself. Yes, you could go online, you could watch panels like this, but talking to a person and making that relationship is probably the best way that you could decolonize this space, is just getting to know, like buying them coffee and again, paying them for their time. And then if you don't have access to that, even still, and you're reading from the internet, you still compensate the people. There's this organization called Doom Tiki who kind of turns Tiki on its head, in that they partner with different marginalized groups that are exploited by the Tiki culture, and they create a drink with somebody from that culture, and they donate that money that's made from that fundraiser through the drinks to an organization of that person's choice. So just an example of how you could give back, because we're all, like we've all reiterated, we're all facing so many other problems besides someone yelling at us that and about our fashion, or about us trying to educate on the day-to-day. So, and also last thing too, is learn what cultural exchange is too, because I think that has happened. I have seen some beautiful in the food scene, fusions by different cultures through cultural exchange, and make sure that if you are participating in cultural exchange, meaning collaborating with someone with a different culture to create something new, that everyone's benefiting. Because I've heard this argument again about Tiki, about saying, well, it's appropriating so many cultures, so it's not really appropriation. But like, who's benefiting? You know, that's true cultural exchange. It's when everyone equally benefits and nobody is exploited. So that's how you decolonize, but I'm sure there's more. I can't wait to hear what others say.
In addition to what the panelists have to say, I also think it's very important to also share with our friends, our followers, just various resources, places to buy indigenous businesses owned by POCs who may not have like this, like a large following, but they have like some beautiful things that you can use to support them. I've always been a supporter of small businesses, but like just acknowledging like, hey, did you know that so-and-so has this business, and like just as an Instagrammer, if you're wearing something that comes from a POC own business, tag them, because like I always get questions all the time like, oh, where did you get this, or where did you get that? Like, yeah, let me just tag this business, and this is where I got from. So just also just really empowering and uplifting small businesses, especially if they're owned by BIPOCs, also really helps. So that also helps them to put money in their pockets as well. Additionally, I also think that events, pinup events, rockabilly events can very much benefit by having folks like us, BIPOCs, POCs on the in their planning committees and their pinup pageant organization committees, just so we can also provide a perspective. Many a time, I want to give you another example. Many a time I'll be watching a movie and it'll be taking place like in another country. However, when I look at the credits, a lot of it is all just white folks working on this movie about like another culture. And when I was just looking at those credits, like, oh, that movie was so bad. Why is it so bad? Like, and I didn't even bother to like just have someone from that culture as a part of as part of consulting. So I really feel like when you diversify voices, when you can identify folks that can help you with planning and just acknowledging their time for it, it also just helps to decolonize and to also just uplift those who were originally turned off from vintage culture, to as a way to like, hey, here's a way back in. We value you, because when we see that we are othered, that we do not belong, we are not valued, and why should we spend time and money? Why should I spend big at Viva and feel like I don't belong? But when you invite folks to just be part of that planning, it actually does look okay. It looks like they're taking steps for us to belong. And when we are part of that planning, our voices also need to be listened to. And please do not shut us down. Do not gaslight us, because we're also telling our story and our truth too. And don't use that opportunity to tokenize like, hey, look, we have a BIPOC person on our committee. Don't tokenize us either. If you invite us to just come to your spaces in these higher level positions, value what we have to say, and definitely listen to us. And because I think also just being in positions where we have some sort of power in planning and organizing, that also just starts to begin the decolonization process. But it's also on the onus of the organizers to also be a listener and not a tokenizer.
The short list of it is listen to others, do your research, which means diversifying your research, as everybody has mentioned, and then speaking up. That's the only thing that I haven't heard mentioned that I would like to bring up, is that this act of silence because you're afraid of standing up or afraid of getting things wrong, we need to cut that out, because it's enabling a lot of really bad behavior. We all know that people who have nasty things to say never think twice about saying it. So why should we when we have kind things to say? So when you are out there in the world and you witness some sort of injustice of any kind to anyone, say something about it. Be brave, be that person. Don't feel afraid that you're the odd man out. Don't be afraid to be the black sheep. You're not crazy. You're just being gaslighted by a lot of people. And unfortunately, that has been the case for a lot of BIPOC in this community for a very long time. So we're tired. and we're kind of at the ends of our ropes, and there is a lot of grace that is being given, and way more than should be, if I'm going to be completely honest. So the best thing that allies can do, and I always hear that question, what can I do as an ally? Like, what do I do? What you do is you actually listen when you hear humanitarians speak, and then enact upon it. Do your work. It is so lonely to be an activist and have your voice be the loudest in the room. So the best thing you can do for another activist that you see is help echo them. Don't let them make this fight just their own solo fight. I have done that too many times, and I'm too tired to keep doing that. I need to start gathering individuals that I can be like, hey, this is something that I'm serious about, and I can't do this alone. I'm the only voice in this space, and I need to bring other people in it, because yeah, sometimes it's really hard for that perpetrator to listen to the person they're attacking. But when everybody else who comes into the conversation starts kind of saying the same thing, for some odd reason, it makes a lot more sense. So my thing to close out this conversation, because I know we've been talking for a long time, is speak out, be brave, do the right thing. And that is the right thing. The right thing is to stand for those who are marginalized, no matter who they are, no matter what space it's in, and just be brave. Take a chance, because you're really saving someone.
Absolutely. We do have one final question, and then we're going to do a final thoughts. The last question is, how will decolonizing vintage culture make the vintage community more accessible to Black, Indigenous, people of color, BIPOC?
So we need to have the thought that we're all equal, right? Because as we talked about before, if we're able to actually decolonize this culture, it's going to make people feel safer. It's going to make more Black, Indigenous, people of color want to join. And who doesn't want to make our vintage community stronger, more diverse, have more, contributions to it? You know what I mean? I'd love to see myself reflected a little bit more in my own community. And I think the fact that there are so few people of color in the vintage community, it does scare away some people, namely Black people, because that's where my experience comes from. I know a lot of Black people who have either stepped away or just refuse to even, they like it, but they won't participate in it because they're afraid to, honestly, because we don't really feel welcome, to be fair. Like Lady Lay was touching on, or I believe it was Scarlett, actually. She said, our voices, we want to be heard and not gaslit. We want to be able to be in a space and share our thoughts without being told that, oh, well, it wasn't that bad. Or, well, why don't you just ignore it? Just if somebody's bothering you, just ignore it. Like, no, that's not the way it works. And I did want to touch on the fact that, Black and Indigenous people of color have contributed to every single time period in history, full stop. We've been hunted. There's a lot of Indigenous people who have been wiped out of it, in the history books and in real life, like, whole tribes of people just destroyed. We need to do a better job of finding these people. We need to do a better job of finding, the Black, Indigenous, people of color. We need to find those voices. You can't just sit around and wait for those voices to come to you, because it ain't going to happen. You need to make yourself more inviting. Seek out these people, invite these people, tell them that they are wanted, they are needed, their voices are important. Tell them that you will make them safe. You will be by their side. You will stand by them. You won't let them, be belittled or gaslit or told to be quiet. Our job is, like we've been saying all night, is just be a human, man. Like, we're all people. There is no reason there shouldn't be a more diverse community within the vintage community. we all contribute. We all have contributed. Let's take the initiative to educate ourselves so that more people of color can feel welcomed and safe.
When I think about decolonizing vintage culture, I don't even, because I come from this intersectional activist principles, I think about how all these things are interrelated. And by decolonizing it, it's going to make it accessible for everyone. People with disabilities, people who are BIPOC, people of different income levels, just, people who are LGBTQ. And so I'm not even thinking about it, about how it's more accessible for BIPOC. I think it's going to make it more accessible for everyone. And we need that, Gosh, the world has been really awful, past few years, especially during the pandemic. And I think we all deserve to feel safe. We all deserve to feel like we belong. I always am in the believer of like, if there's no space, you got to build a bigger table. You gotta make the table fit all sorts of sizes and types of people. And there's nothing that I don't think there's anything that we could lose by doing this, only to gain. It'll just be more of a fuller story, and the histories that we're trying to preserve will be more true and more diverse. And so and I think that it'll make people of all sorts of backgrounds realize that they have their own history and that it matters. So I think that's all I could say about that.
How do we start decolonializing vintage culture, making things accessible to all folks? Well, as someone who was been very much turned off by my local vintage scene, it's so strange anytime I mention like, but you live in Southern California. That's like one of the most diverse cities on earth. And when I tell them about my experience, like there really isn't a space where I feel like I belong here in terms of the vintage community. Yes, I can take up space, but as an introvert, that takes up so much energy that I have to like just recharge and just plug myself back in for like a few days, because when you're the only one and you feel like you want to take up space, because I think just taking up space is a very powerful power move. At the same time, when you're the only one there, it just doesn't feel, it feels exhausting. And I ask myself, why do I do this to myself? But it would very much help if we could all identify, if we could just all come in like, yeah, I'll if you're going to this event, like, yeah, let me go with you. Or can I ally myself with you? How can I help you? Like, how can I be a better ally? And it's important to acknowledge that ally, it's a verb. It is something you do. That's not something that you just put on your Instagram profile, on your Twitter profile. It is not just a black box you put in at one time. No, you have to keep acting. And if you really believe in equality, social justice, you're going to do it, and you're going to put weight into those words, into those hashtags, and into what you say online. Because as an Asian American in 2021, after all the violence that has happened to us and still continues, I could use some allies in my court. And for a place as diverse as Los Angeles, I could just use some so I can feel very much welcome again. Like I remember the last time I attended Dapper Day, I was having consistent panic attacks because I didn't feel like I belonged. I felt like I got a lot of weird looks on me. And something I forgot to mention, something you probably can't quite see here on camera, is I'm a darker skinned Asian. And darker skinned Asians, it tend to be very much frowned upon among other Asians, and also among like society at large, because like, oh, you're not a true Asian, you're dark skinned, like you're not a quote unquote true Asian. What's that supposed to mean, And I really think we just need to as a whole, we just need to figure out how can we be better allies. Again, just going back to what I had mentioned before, like how can we involve, how can we empower folks who are normally marginalized? How can we bring that back in, and how we can like value their time? Because again, this is exhausting. I mean, I had to like recharge my batteries almost for like a week and a half to just kind of just get back up, because don't get me wrong, I like educating. I like talking to all of you. I like addressing these issues. But after some time, it's like, I don't want to be a broken record about it. And I want to just, I think it would just be better if we can just find out how we can be better allies, and like just put weight to what we see online, the kind of activist memes, postings, trends, because these hashtags, these movements, they're not trends. This is something you do every day to support one another. And when you recognize that activism is not a trend, it is an ongoing process to keep supporting one another till we get to our goals. And I think when we are on that mentality, we can really start making things much more inclusive. Perhaps my partner and I will feel safer attending Viva. Maybe I'll feel much more comfortable going back into pinup pageants. But at this point in time, I don't know if I'll be supported. And I think if we learn how to support one another, I think we can get to a better community.
Decolonizing this space would mean that that white ruler that I mentioned earlier is shattered finally and for all time. No longer do we have to compare ourselves to it, or others have compare our images to it. And that also just keeps the space a lot less white centered, like it always has been for a very long time. That's the ideal. That's the woman everybody wants to be. For instance, people forget Rita Hayworth is actually of Latinx Hispanic descent. Her real name's Margarita. So she's not a white woman. I mean, she might be if she's from Hispanic descent who had a lot of colonialism there, and like with the conquistadors and everything. Unfortunately, I'm not educated on her, so I cannot speak on that right now. But that's an example of twisting a by POC individual to make it fit that white ruler, and then it's now the white standard. And that just needs to be erased from all of our views of the world. That's really how this decolonization will what it will do for this community. It'll shatter the way that we view the world, because the way that we have viewed the world is flawed and only for the winners. And it's we've been told now for a year and a half that that age is over. It's tired. It's hurting a lot of people to this day. This isn't a fight that just started now. This is a fight that has been fought since really the beginning, that we noticed that we were all different from one another and decided that was something to hate. So that's what decolonizing this space will mean. We're going to eradicate that hate that biases all of us from one another, and hopefully instead we'll replace it with something that is truly inclusive, which means it's inclusive to not only all races, but all genders, whether they present whatever gender they present themselves, or not a gender. It means anybody who has different sexual orientations, abilities, disabilities. Ageism is something as well that we need to get over. So that's what decolonizing the space will do. It'll help shatter the rest of these structures that colonization holds up. And it's done. We're done with that. If we're going back to that time, I don't want to be here. If I'm going to be honest, like I got to exit the planet because enough people have died and suffered and still suffer to this day. And it's really our time and this generation of activists to really try to make a full stop, not just half do it anymore, because it's enough. We've had enough.
You guys, your voices tonight, I really hope that everyone hears them, because I have been very, very honored to be here live with you all and hear your voices tonight. And I feel very proud of this panel that we've put together for Empowered Vintage Voices. So thank you all so much. Like, yes. I think that concludes our discussion for tonight. And yeah, I cannot wait to get this out to everyone. I'm just going to say this last little bit here. Yeah, we really want everyone to take this video and share it with your local vintage community. That's the whole point. That's why we're making this. We're making it for you to take and share. Leave us questions and comments in the comments section when we post this video. You could also private message us, or you can email us at empoweredvintage@gmail.com. Yeah, we are open to your questions. We want to help you, and we want to educate and grow and love, compassion. Amazing, amazing. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to end the recording, and then we will take a minute to say goodbye to each other.